Hi, I'm Erik Linask with TMC, and I'm here at Panduit's facilities in Chicago, Illinois, and I'm talking with Jeff Paliga, who is the Director of Global Solutions Development. Good thing I have the card.
That's correct.
Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks, Erik.
So one of the things that we've been really focusing on and talking about during today's series of interviews is the idea of a smart data center. So what, to you, is a smart data center?
That's a pretty good open-ended question. That can go in several directions, but from a smart data center, from our perspective, really incorporates more than just one element of the data center. Smart data center really talks to the positioning of how you plan and design, how you specify, how you install, and then equally as important, how you operate that facility. So I think data centers have obviously been core and critical to business in the past, but we're seeing a lot more interdependencies across the data center, and not just from the systems themselves, but from the people that operate and occupy and manage and are ultimately responsible for the data center. So a smart data center is everything from the physical infrastructure to the logical infrastructure, and making sure your applications and operations are being run as efficiently and optimized as possible.
So when you've got those different elements that you talked about just a moment ago, about the people that are involved in the various pieces of the puzzle there in the data center, how do you go about getting these people to all work together and think together and have the same approach to the data center?
That's another good question, obviously. So that is not an easy task, and I wouldn't want to oversimplify that. It's part of the evolution that we're seeing. From our perspective, the physical infrastructure is core to the data center. It's very ubiquitous throughout the data center, permeates the data center and the enterprise as well, that infrastructure, to support the business applications. So to grab the number of people together and get them on the same page and share a common goal is not an easy task. But what we're seeing, a couple things are starting to drive that is, as I mentioned, the interdependencies of the systems. So, for example, in the past, facilities and IT operated in two different silos, right? IT was running the applications, and they got the IT gear. Facilities would support that with power and cooling and things of that nature. But we're seeing a real coming together as these data centers are sharing common goals. Energy costs, utility consumption is driving up. The story goes the energy bill never showed up on the IT manager's desk. That's still true, but the reality is that's been raised in visibility. So that's really driving a lot more commonality between the departments as well as the systems. Additionally, I think a lot of things between coming more conscientious in optimizing your operations. So the interdependencies also tie into, if that facilities group is not able to support the compute capacity that the IT has specified, you're going to have a shared downtime, an unplanned downtime. So not only from a standpoint of costs and utilization, there really is an interdependency, and that's being driven by high-density compute environments, as well as just the number of applications growing inside the data center.
And obviously then the need to deliver data and services and applications from that data center.
Absolutely.
Excuse me. So what is it really a cost factor that's driving the people to look at smart data centers?
It's one of the primary pieces. In a data center, it's application availability, uptime, 365, 24/7. So it's always about the application becoming more available. Right now, in the current economic conditions, cost is becoming a primary issue, as you can imagine. So there's still a lot of applications being deployed, a lot of new servers being deployed. The question comes down to, is it a new build, a Greenfield build, or is it a retro situation? So in that, people are becoming very smart, cost conscientious. For the dollars that they spend, they want to see a return on that type of investment. So cost is core of it, and it's more of a shared, back to the previous question, it's more of a shared cost and responsibility across that data center.
It's excellent lead into my next question. What's the difference in terms of build out of a greenfield deployment versus brownfield, if you will?
So that's sort of a difficult question, but a good one. A greenfield, there's a lot more as far as what goes into that. It kind of ties back to your earlier question of getting all the stakeholders on board. So a greenfield build is really getting into issues such as site selection, utility costs per that location, regulations, requirements, and then geography as far as a labor force to support that. So I really couldn't give you a percentage as far as what the differences between the two are, but what we're seeing is for some of the high-tech, the mega data centers, the cost that's really the issue that's driving those build-outs for Greenfield are getting access to utilities, alternate energy, wind, solar, water, things of that nature are really driving where those facilities are located. And it's really about containing their costs because they're high consumers, they're high compute environments. In a retrofit, what we're seeing as far as the cost is, if those customers and clients aren't available to do a greenfield build, they'll look at portions of their data center as in sections or pods or islands, if you will, and they'll go in and start retrofitting that. So the cost is really about, what does the power infrastructure look like? Do I have enough cooling capacity? Which in many cases we're finding there's plenty of cooling that's just not being conserved or optimized. So there's a heck of a lot more cost around the greenfield build, but people are looking at their business models, especially with mergers and acquisitions, figuring out, can I retro a certain portion of my data center that I do have sufficient power and cooling and space versus a brand new build. So everybody's trying to extend the life cycle of that data center, whether it's retro or looking at a new build for the length of time and the life cycle management on that facility.
What do companies tend to do when faced with the choice of retrofitting or going with a brand new facility?
So many cases, I think the .com bust made available a lot of white raised floor square footage. So it was pretty easy for companies to come in and buy some data center space, retrofit it, get it up and running. Well, we've seen a lot of that square footage be consumed, actually almost all being consumed. So the questions they're coming through with now are, what does it look like from a costing standpoint? And that brings back to all the people, the business holders, the line of business managers, facilities, IT operations, to understand what really goes into building a new versus a retro. And so now companies are looking at, if possible, retrofitting existing facilities, again, back to the power and cooling issues, if that infrastructure is in place, versus a brand new data center build. So kind of a bridge to fill the gap. So basically, it's dependent upon the business unit and their criteria. And some companies are bridging that gap with some hosting. So they'll go outside and have some of their applications hosted. It sort of buys them some time. There's some issues, both pros and cons around that, but a hosting application gives them an opportunity to see if they can prolong that build out if possible. If not, they're usually faced with doing a greenfield build.
So in a retrofit situation, what do you do with the equipment that you're taking out?
So people, a complete rip and replace is very, very expensive, very costly. But as I said, many people are finding that generally the physical infrastructure has outlived its usefulness, or the number of applications have forced them to do rip and replace. So what we talk to customers about is, when you get faced with that situation, the approach is, don't just do a rip and replace. Really look at what you want that space to accomplish, the life cycle, the longevity, the applications you think you're going to be running. And what I like to talk about, the physical infrastructure when it goes in, a lot of people tend to look at the logical. So the network diagrams, where things go, how they're connected, from a logical standpoint is key. What we're talking to customers very, very intimately about is how the physical network, physical infrastructure supports that. So when you go to specify cabinets or pathways or raceway, even the connectivity you're putting in there, our infrastructure's set up to last 10, 15 years, right? So when you think about that, we talk to customers about holistic planning. We're looking at even the cabinets, the things that, we talk about square footage, cabinets, the volume they take. We're talking to customers about looking at technology migration plans, making sure the physical infrastructure truly gets you 10 to 15 years, because that rip and replace you talked about is very expensive. And as I said earlier, that infrastructure touches all points inside that data center and beyond. So it's a lot about having a technology roadmap, migration plan, mapping your logical and physical infrastructure onto one architecture, and giving the expected benefits you anticipated from the beginning of the project.
If you've got somebody looking at a rip and replace, what do you actually do with the physical equipment that they're ripping out?
So many times, this sort of plays down the whole consolidation approach. So many times we're finding customers will go in and do a rip and replace from the active gear or some of the applications that really were ghost servers. They were underutilized or not being utilized in the past. So that equipment is sort of a no-brainer. It's pulled out. It's expensive to have those systems in place. They're taking up costly real estate. They're consuming power. And they're causing, many times, a lot of confusion about what's on, what's not on. So that equipment usually is pulled out, and the consolidation effort opens up a lot of floor space, a lot of rack space. The physical infrastructure that we provide, we're talking to customers about looking at Cat 6 or 10 gig infrastructure. So that rip and replace is extended. The cabling actually comes outside of there, and many times they can, the end users are either disposing of that, or they're working with companies to kind of reclaim and recycle some of that material.
Excellent. We've been talking here with Jeff Paliga at Panduit. Jeff, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate it.